Anyway, let's hope we're going to get a bit of sense. We've got the man, the myth, and the legend. That is the great Peter Ford, and I'm gonna add him in now. Peter, how are you, sir?
Hello, David. Very good to be with you.
Good. It's nice to hear from you and see you again, Peter. And before we get into the sort of the Middle East shaboodle and everything, can you just give us a wee bit of background about who you are and why you're here tonight?
Uh, yes, well, I'm Peter Ford. My chief claim to fame is that I'm a former British ambassador in the Arab world in two countries, Syria and Bahrain. But I then had a second career after that in the UN, in fact, working for the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, which is very prominent in what's going on in Gaza at the moment. So I was instrumental in raising Gaza from the ashes in the last round of fighting in about 2014. I helped raise $500 million from the rich Arab countries to rebuild much of Gaza. But I left that, and I've just been leading a campaigning existence for the last few years.
So you'd be accused of being a terrorist supporter then, Peter, because all that money's gone towards making weapons of war. I mean, that's what the Zionist lobby would say, isn't it?
Indeed, I was lucky to be able to redeem myself doing good work with the UN after my evil career with British diplomacy.
I mean, I think Peter. But before we get into the Middle East, I want to just start with the Ukraine situation because that's where you and I first met, and we organised the rally in April, early April of this year, where we spoke and we had a great rally, and we said that what would happen is there would be a counter-offensive that would fail miserably, and tens of thousands of people would die. Nothing would change. The Russians would repel it, and by the end of the year, that the Zelensky regime would be on very shaky ground. And it doesn't actually give me any pleasure to say, Peter, but we have been vindicated completely. And what we have witnessed is a horrific loss of life and a total just state of carnage and waste over in Ukraine.
That's right, David. I'm tempted to say Ukraine. Where's that? Because it's disappeared from the headlines at least. And there are some striking parallels with what's happening in Gaza. In each case, you have a headstrong head of government, Zelensky and Netanyahu, clients of the United States, pushed forward by the United States in a vain hope that one would destroy Russia and the other would destroy Hamas. And although Netanyahu has not yet met the likely fate of Zelensky, I believe he's heading in the same direction, and Israel is heading into another quagmire. The Americans are
Why do you think
lucky.
this? And I think it's important to remember, Peter. Like again, this isn't our first rodeo. The way in which they lionize Zelensky, and it really is. It's like the laws of physics. For every action, there is an equal or opposite reaction. And if you lionize someone like Zelensky, you hoist him on this parapet, and you make him this hero. The next logical step is for that to fall straight to earth, and it is no one wants to see him anymore. He's not welcome in Israel. His own people are starting to speak out against them, and he is just another one that's added to the list of useful idiots for the Americans and their regime. Whether it was Saddam during the Iran-Iraq War, Gaddafi at one point, Bin Laden. you don't need to be a soothsayer. You just need to learn from history. This is what happens to all of these people.
That's right. And from the Americans' point of view, the one good thing about Gaza is that it's hiding or obscuring their failure in Ukraine.
Yes.
It sucked all the air out of the media environment, and I think it will also have long-term implications for the support for Ukraine. I mean, I have to say that many of the people who've been marching alongside me for Palestine previously were shouting for Ukraine.
Yes.
And I think it's opened their eyes to see that America is not what they thought it was, champion of liberty. I think there will be a long-term sort of improvement, especially on the left, people realizing that it's American imperialism that we're fighting in Europe as in the Middle East.
Yeah, and as you say, it was interesting the way the propaganda worked, because it worked so effectively with COVID, it worked so effectively with Ukraine. But I think what's maybe been quite good about it's not good about it, but the one thing about this conflict is it has maybe jolted a few people back into using their brain again. And what's interesting about the Israel-Palestine conflict is that the left have been activated. They're out. They don't trust the media, whereas before the media was right on COVID in Israel, whereas the right, which many would consider me a part of, they've completely lost the plot, and they're pushing the most ultra-Zionist talking points possible. And many of the people who stood with me during COVID and Ukraine are now saying I'm a Hamas supporter. So it is. Whereas what I say is, no, I am just consistent. I am consistently against all of these wars. I am consistently against anything that the West does. that's all it is. Peter, like to go back and deconstruct. So on the 7th of October, there was a barrage of videos and information appeared, and then the Israeli government went into a propaganda, launch. I am very skeptical about their narrative of what actually happened on the 7th of October. What's your opinion of the events on the 7th of October?
Clouded in obscurity, little to no proof has been brought forward for the most lurid claims that were made. For example, about the notorious beheadings, not a single piece of evidence has been brought forward. Or the rapes, not a single individual has been paraded to say that they were raped. And so it has been with all the most lurid claims. Max Blumenthal has provided some excellent documentation on this, drawing attention to discrepancies in the Israeli narrative, to mystery over the numbers. There are still several hundred alleged victims unaccounted for. It's not clear how many were military, and above all, it's not clear how many were victims not of Hamas or jihad, but of the Israeli military themselves. The type of injuries that they sustained suggests that this was, well, we can't even call it friendly fire, because it appears that the Israeli military, after regrouping, at first they panicked, ran away, and then other units came forward with orders to shoot on sight anything that moved, whether it was Israeli or Palestinian. And there are strong grounds to believe that very many of the victims were the victims of the IDF, Israeli Defense Forces.
Well, that's what they said, was that the majority of the Hamas insurgents burned people alive, but actually, what looks more likely is that they were burned alive by missiles that were launched by Apache helicopters. They look like victims of Hellfire missiles, and that's why they're called Hellfire missiles, because they destroy and incinerate everything around them. And a lot of people, and what the comeback has been is, well, these people died. You're a disgrace for even questioning why. And what I always say, well, the truth is the truth is the truth is the truth. And I want to know exactly what happens here. And if you look at the kibbutz and the situation, anyone that's taken there only goes with a guide from the IDF, and they are presented with a version of event. There has been no third party or international observers allowed in to do an analysis of this.
That's right, and it's noticeable that the hostages who've emerged are once they fell into the claws of the Israelis themselves, became silent. But while they were in transit on Egyptian territory, they said that their captors were nice to them, treated them well. But there's another factor in play here. We have to remember what was Hamas's objective here. It was to seize hostages. Their fighters did not have orders to kill indiscriminately. The whole rationale for the breakout was to grab as many hostages as possible over a couple of hours and then dash back and negotiate for the release of thousands of Palestinian political prisoners held in Israeli jails. That was, but Hamas, in a sense, over succeeded. They hadn't expected the Israeli forces to cut and run. But Peter, still, their objective was to get hostages, not kill people.
Now, obviously, Hamas are a prescribed terror organization in this country, which limits, what we can talk about. But is under international law, are people allowed to do that?
No, the taking of
hostages is not allowed.
The taking of captives, military prisoners, is permissible, of course, but not the taking of civilian hostages. So in that, Hamas certainly flouted or abused in international law, but it's a matter of proportion, isn't it? Compare that with the thousands of people murdered by the Israelis, the thousands of children, many of them with their heads blown off, murdered by the Israelis. It's totally disproportionate.
Peter, what I've actually said is that if I was a friend of the state of Israel, I would have said to people, now, obviously what happened on the October the 7th was shocking. Many people saw it as barbaric, that it was a terror attack. Again, some people might debate that. The Israeli government then had an opportunity to leverage that. Now, even George W. Bush, and I'm not praising him here, tried to build a coalition of the willing. He attempted to gain UN support for his actions. If I was a friend of Israel, what I would have said is, look, this has happened. This is horrific. What you need to do is isolate the Gaza Strip and then take the necessary action. But they didn't do that. They just immediately started carpet bombing the Gaza Strip And what they have done in the space of a month is lost really any goodwill that they had amongst the majority of people. Why do you think they did that, Peter?
I think they became victims of their own propaganda. They immediately saw an opportunity to vilify Hamas as the new ISIS, and they fabricated evidence and twisted evidence to that effect. But that locked them into an inability to negotiate. The sensible thing would have been just to negotiate hostage release for release of the Palestinian prisoners. That would have been the rational thing to do, just as it would have been rational for Zelensky to reach a compromise over autonomy for the Donbass. But no, they didn't. They were egged on by the Americans and the British, and became prisoners of their own propaganda and rhetoric, and had to plow on regardless. And they're still prisoners of their own narrative. There's no way for them to retreat without loss of faith.
Peter, do you think that is indicative of the Netanyahu regime or Israeli society at large? Because obviously Israel is not a monolith. There are different perspectives.
Well, I think Netanyahu undoubtedly saw a political opportunity here to escape from jail, almost literally. He was facing massive internal opposition. It was expected that he would be toppled imminently, and that he would then be put on trial for his various corruption misdemeanors. Undoubtedly, he must have seen this as an opportunity to avoid jail, and it still is. And this is why I think his strategy, if you can call it that, is just to keep plowing on, string it all out, keep it going more or less indefinitely. I don't think he has an exit strategy. He's just hoping for something to turn up that will save him from his nemesis. But the polls in Israel itself tell the story that his nemesis can't be put off very much longer.
Peter, do you believe in a two-state solution? What's your solution to the situation there?
Well, the optimal realistic solution would be a hostages for peace deal. And I suspect that this is the direction that the Americans are now belatedly trying to push the Israelis. But it doesn't suit Netanyahu's book. As I just mentioned, he wants to keep it all going in the hope that something will turn up. And therefore, since he's the man in charge with his fascist cronies, it's more likely that first they will try to do a Stalingrad on Gaza City, then move on and try to do a repeat operation in the south. But there are many difficulties in the way of that. First, there's the opposition of Hamas themselves. We don't know what's going on. The Israelis have admitted to, I think, losing 30 of their soldiers. And there must be hundreds who've been injured.
I think it's more. See, to be honest with you, from the footage I've seen, which I think is very, again, very subjective. I reckon the Israelis have lost hundreds of troops so far, and they've lost numerous tanks as well, and it's not going as well for them as they anticipated.
Yeah, one suspects. There's another thing that's not going well, and that's the economy.
No,
Israel is a small country. It wasn't called the 6-day war for nothing. Israel cannot, the wisdom before this war, this genocide, was that Israel as a country could not sustain a long drawn out war. and this is true. Number of displaced from North and South Israel is about 250,000. And then there's about 360,000 reservists who've been called up away from their day jobs. Hundreds of Israeli small companies are collapsing. They've not got workers. The shekel is at a 14-year low. The Israeli economy is facing definite recession. So there's this pressure mounting as well. And I believe there is also pressure probably mounting from within the IDF. The more realistic military realize they're on a hiding to nothing to save Netanyahu's skin.
Yeah, I mean, he's not like that. This is what I've tried to point out from the start. Is so many people have just tried to make out you're like what I just was so annoyed with was they were repeating the George Bush talking points. You're either with the terrorists or you're against us. Hamas is ISIS, despite the fact that the Israelis, supported ISIS, the Nusra Front. I mean, but so many people they lapped it up, and the Netanyahu is a polarizing figure in Israel and in the Western world, and this black and white narrative that they've tried to portray, and it just simply isn't true. And the media have done such a good job of shutting that down. But Peter, I'm just interested long term. I mean, do you believe in this two-state solution, or do you believe that the state of Israel will collapse eventually? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I used to believe in the two-state solution, but I've become disillusioned. I can't see how in practice, if you think that the international community is going to force Israel to make meaningful concessions to the Palestinians in order to create a Palestinian state, when the Europeans or the international community can't even make Israel accept a temporary ceasefire, well, you're not very realistic. No, salvation is not going to come from the international community, and it's not going to be imposed by America, and it's not going to come about through a sudden de-Zionification of Israel. So much more likely is going to be the continuation of the status quo. Anybody who over the last 25 years, when asked what's going to happen in the next 5 years, anybody who said continuation of the status quo, they would have been proven correct. And that's my prediction today.
And it's I mean, I think more and more with the actions of the state of Israel, it's kind of it's a pariah state. I mean that, and I don't say that out of any ill will. I think I'm just stating a fact. The way it behaves in the West Bank, the behavior of its settlers, backed up with the IDF, it loses it. And I mean, Chris Williamson said that and then people then say, well, if you say Israel don't has a right to exist, you're just a Nazi, and you're going to be responsible for everybody Jewish dying. No, I think there is a big difference, because of course Jewish people lived in that area for hundreds of years beforehand. Christians lived, and again, there are a lot of Jewish people. It is a small minority, but it is growing that's saying, look, this is actually, the state of Israel is detrimental to the safety of Jewish people. We're being slaughtered here as a result of this, and it just is. It's not working anymore.
Well, in a way, the old narratives are being brought back to life by this latest crisis, and you're hearing people claiming that this is the only place where we're safe. we don't have any other country, which is very strange, given that there are more Jews living outside Israel than anywhere else. And in fact, they're people who, for the most part, enjoy two nationalities. Most of us have to get by with one. But the old Holocaust-related narrative has been given a fresh world, fresh lease of life. I'm afraid we're going backwards. It's very difficult to see any rays of light. But having said that, I'll just identify one. Technology. Immense changes can come about in military technology. Think of the impact of drone warfare. Think of AI. Who knows? Who knows whether the symmetry of war may not change in favor of the weak. In fact, AI holds out some prospects of that happening. I mean, some of the prospects are fairly horrendous, but this is the one thing that I would point to, the development of new military technologies. They may favor the oppressor, but they may also help in the asymmetry, in asymmetric warfare, which is what technically we're seeing now in Gaza. The day when the Palestinians could land a nano drone on Netanyahu's nose might see him be a bit more realistic.
Yeah. I mean, I think really this is a watershed moment for a lot of people. And Peter, just one thing I want to just segue into towards the end is what is scheduled for this Saturday. Because what I've seen is that the Zionist propaganda machine has done a very good job of co-opting people on the right to think that they're fighting their cause, whereas my argument is, well, it's not. That's not really the case. You've now got a situation where there is a big march planned for Saturday, not going past the cenotaph, but there is a big potential for trouble. What do you think what do you think? Well, I think it's hard to say what will happen, but what do you think? A lot of this tension's being stirred up deliberately, with the situation in London.
Well, I plan to be there. I'm pleased to see that the Met chief earlier this evening said that it would not be banned. And I think he deserves credit for that. He's resisted bullying by the Home Secretary and the Daily Mail, full marks to the Met Commissioner. I think it's likely to pass off without serious incident. The only caveat I would raise is the possible action of agent provocateur. I don't have the slightest doubt that the Israeli embassy will have people within the crowd, and heaven knows what they might do, but it would be quite difficult for them to make trouble, I think, far from straightforward. There have been, as you know, 3 big marches already, and they've never succeeded in causing serious trouble.
Peter, just I'm interested to know you, but for a lot of people though on the right, they are a bit upset at what they see as their country being taken over. They see this as a foreign country now. What would you say about that?
Oh, I think this is wonderful. I think we're now realizing, and people on the left are realizing what their first principles are. They had lost sight of them, and the left is realizing that it has nothing seriously in common with the jingoistic right. I think many on the left are becoming born again internationalists, and it on the whole, it's helpful for people like Tommy Robinson to come wading in and effectively smearing by association, Suella Braverman and the Mail and all the rest of them. I think that it will affect politics in this country quite deeply and in ways which are very difficult to forecast. But this is a moral issue, and the British people, God bless them, feel very deeply about moral issues and they can recognize cruelty when they see it. They may be misled for a while, as they have been misled over Ukraine. But in this case, the issues are crystal clear. Either you're on the side which is blasting babies to smithereens, and I don't mean Hamas, or you're not. So I think bring it on. But I'm fairly confident that Saturday's march will just see a mammoth display of full spectrum support for Palestine.
Peter, in the long term, though, is there not a risk that all this? And I know you have a positive view of humanity and society. I am perhaps a bit more, dare I say, black-pilled on that. Is there not a risk that this kind of stuff could morph into some sort of civil war, where you have all these competing parties? You've got sort of right-wing people angry about what's happened, who are taking the side of the Zionists. Then you've got Muslims taking the side of the. Do you not think this does, in the long term, have the potential for? And some people would maybe be happy about that.
I take your point, David, and there's a lot of truth in it. And I have myself accused Suella Braverman of trying to play the race card. That is their game. This is the only way the Tories must reckon they can possibly claw back the big lead that Labour have. It's the only area, migration and security, race relations, where they could stand any possible hope, and therefore they're trying to provoke and inflame. But it's so transparent, I think it's more likely to backfire. It's going to frighten the horses, and there'll be a reaction. I mean, we see already the Labour Party tearing itself apart. This is a very big plus to come out of this.
What I think is really shown up here is, and I agree that everybody who believes in humanity or whatever should be doing their best to stop this appalling carnage. It is absolutely horrific what is being done in the Gaza Strip. But what this has really shown is the amount of just utterly spineless people there are, like Keir Starmer, like the Labour Party. They are just, and the Arab leaders as well, like Abdullah of Jordan over getting a nice wee payoff today from von der Leyen. I mean, people are quick to criticise the West, but I'm equally quick to criticise all these corrupt regimes in the Arab world, because they've sold the Palestinian people down the drain. They don't do anything for them. They keep selling oil to Israel. They keep the things going. It is. I think, again, what it shows you is that we have a psychopathic elite in power, just really across the board. And they have no compassion whatsoever for humanity, and it's just a vile situation we find ourselves in. I don't think anybody really likes their leaders anywhere. I think they're all disgusted by them.
Well, if there's one good thing to come out of this crisis, it is that it's blown out of the water what was the Arab normalization with Israel. The Americans had pinned their hopes on what they call the Abraham Accords, and they'd had some success with pushovers like Morocco and South Sudan and the UAE. They were running into problems with the Saudis, but they were well on the way, it seems. Well, all that has been blown out of the water. It's blown up in the faces of the architects of the Abraham Accords. They are never going to come back. They are a total embarrassment now. So American Middle East strategy is in tatters. Not that anything better necessarily will come out of that, but at least the worst of total Arab capitulation has now been avoided. And you see the entry in force of Iran onto the scene. I think today the leaders of Iran and Saudi Arabia were having a palaver together. This is the new world emerging out of the.
I mean, I listened to the speech of Nasrallah the other week, and I actually thought he came across as quite moderate. I listened to the speeches of the Iranians, the North Koreans. These are the people that we are told are so dangerous. They're so extreme. They're out of control. I listened to them, and actually, you're like, well, and you'll know this being a diplomat. The most dangerous people right now on the planet are part of the West. Our governments, our media, they are unbridled hysteria. And that's what we've really had, Peter, since the 7th of October, is this just absolute hysteria. It was the same hysteria over COVID. It was the same hysteria over Ukraine, and it's exactly the same hysteria now. And I often say that was actually the one thing that used to differentiate Britain from other countries around the world, was that we had a stiff upper lip. People knew that they could trust us and do business with us. But I'm sure in your career, and you've mentioned this, Peter, you saw that, the way that we lost that impartiality, that ability to try and be an honest peace broker.
Oh, those days are long gone, David. Although I do think back to 2013, when the British Parliament, led by Labour, rejected the proposal to bomb Syria at that time. That was the last hurrah of British morality in international affairs, I think. And it was effective. At that time, it did stop the Americans bombing, although later we both went on to bomb Syria. So forget Britain. Our only role is to provide some weak cover for the Americans. The Israelis basically are playing for an audience of one, the Uncle Sam. Yeah. As long as Uncle Sam gives them license, they will just press on with whatever they want to do. But you're absolutely right about hysteria, like that point. The parallels are there. We've got climate hysteria. We had COVID hysteria. We had Russophobia, and now we're having a variety of Islamophobia.
And I think as well even people pointed this out about Anthony Blinken. Anthony Blinken went to the Middle East and he said, I don't stand here just as the Secretary of State. I stand here as a Jew. And he went to visit President Sisi, and President Sisi humiliated him. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Sisi, but he said to him, you're supposed to be there as the Secretary of State and an impartial advisor in this. And he goes over and says that. I mean, like, regardless of the politics behind it, people are looking at that and saying, and this is what happened over Russia and Ukraine. Everyday people in the world, your BRICS countries, South America, are just looking and they're saying, we can't do business with these people anymore. They are not behaving in a professional manner. They are ultra partisan. They are, again, I use the word hysterical, and acting in vested interests. Whereas people in the global south, especially over Russia, Ukraine, said that well, let's just try and get a peace deal here because we don't want people dying. And that's the sick part of all of this. All these Western politicians who have never fought in a war, none of their children have ever fought in a war, and all these poor people are dying completely needlessly and for nothing.
Yes, although at least Blinken has an excuse for being blinkered. Rishi Sunak, who said that he stood shoulder to shoulder with Israel, doesn't even have that excuse.
No, that's true. That's true.
But I return to just a second, if I may, the Labour Party and Starmer. Starmer is the weakest link in the anti-Palestine alliance. If Starmer falls, and it's not inconceivable, after all, he's lost the support not of just a handful of councils, but of more than half the Labour membership, more than half the number of Labour MPs, more than half of the shadow cabinet. If this was happening to Corbyn, he'd have been defenestrated a week ago. And so there must be some hope, given that Starmer has totally impaled himself on this. He can't back off until Sunak does. Sunak knows that and is therefore leaving Starmer twisting in the wind.
Yeah,
and this is going to go on for days and maybe weeks.
I think out of them all, Starmer really is the most vacuous, vapid, yet dangerous of them all. And he like Sunak's just a middle manager, just going through the motions. Whereas with Starmer, you can really see that there is a viciousness to Starmer and a duplicity as well, because he was perfectly happy to be best friends with Jeremy Corbyn when it suited him, and then as soon as it became okay to do so, he didn't just stab him once, he stabbed him 100 times. And he really proved himself to be a very ruthless operator, which to me is far scarier.
Absolutely, but I'm encouraged to think that he's now in serious trouble. And I asked myself, where is Angela Rayner these days? Wasn't she the deputy leader of the party? Has Angie suddenly become a shrinking violet, or is she making a political calculation and she's just sharpening her stiletto, ready for the right moment?
I think that's a very good analysis. I mean,
don't keep us waiting. Come on, lass.
I think it's probably above her, dare I say, just a political ability to deal with a complex problem like this. And it's interesting times. Peter, absolutely brilliant stuff. I do thank you so much for coming on. I'm going to be on
a pleasure, David. Thank you.
Thursday night, and I know you're fighting for peace. Peter, where can people keep up to date with your work?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Are you on Twitter or Telegram?
I took a strategic decision not to do Twitter in a personal capacity, but I can be reached through the website of the Workers' Party of Britain.
Yep. No, that's great. Listen, Peter, thank you very much. I'll put up the link there if anyone wants to speak to you there. And thank you very much for coming on. And I'll speak to you again sometime in the future. Okay, sir.
Thank you very much.
Good night, Peter. Thank you.